The sun had just lifted the waters of Floating Island Lake out of shadow when we got there on our third morning in Yellowstone National Park, highlighting the bull moose standing on the slope behind the lake. In the east, we would call this body of water a pond. We were not particularly looking for moose there, though moose was certainly one of the species on my list of most wanted photographs in Yellowstone. Of course, we parked up and bundled out of the cars with our cameras. My Sony a6700 was ready to go, with my trusty bird and wildlife modifications to program mode, and the Tamron 50-400 f4.5 to 6.3 Di3 VC VXD zoom. The bull moose was, according to later measurement on Google Maps, 220 yards away across the pond, and I could have used a bit more reach than the 600mm equivalent that 400mm gives me on the a6700. But we make do with what we have, and the 50-400 is all the lens I want to carry all day while in Yellowstone or anywhere else. I have the a6700 set up to maintain natural color balance in warm light, and the tones of the early sun on the autumn reeds and foliage and the moose itself were rich indeed. The pond was full of reflections. I was concentrating so much on the bull moose that I did not see the cow and calf swimming at the edge of the reeds in the pond until Ken drew my attention to them. The bull was stationary on the hillside and facing away from us, so the cow and the calf provided a much better show. At first I thought they were just playing in the water, but I soon saw that the cow was, or so it seemed to me, attempting to teach the calf to feed on the wilted reeds below the water line. She might have been standing on the bottom, but the calf was definitely swimming, and took every chance to get its head somewhere on its mother to keep it out of the water. We watched and photographed the cow and calf for close to half an hour before the bull began to move down toward the water, and the cow and the calf showed signs of climbing out. It is, according to what I've been told, pretty rare to see a bull in attendance on a cow and a calf, apparently guarding them as they fed. On the other hand, it is rutting season in Yellowstone, and the bull might have just been hoping to get lucky. He did not seem to have much love for the calf, who was probably just in his way. The cow and the calf climbed out and started down along the shore of the pond on the hillside, while the bull shadowed them just behind the tall reeds, making for some interesting shots of the three together. They worked their way slightly uphill and away from the pond, and eventually disappeared over a ridge and into the next draw. The next morning we made it to Floating Island Lake even earlier, before the sun was even on the slope behind the pond. The bull was almost exactly where it had been the day before when we first arrived, but this time in shadow. It took a while longer to pick out the cow again, swimming at the edge of the reeds, and we did not see the calf. I knew my friend Robert, who I was traveling with, was going to want to digiscope the moose. That is, take photos with his iPhone through his Koa spotting scope, which is time-consuming, tripod-mounted business. So I was prepared. I got out my own little travel tripod with the beanbag attached to the head and my folding camp stool, and set up on the edge of the drop-off from the parking area to the pond. The Sony a6700 and Tamron zoom are easy to hand-hold, but it is much more comfortable to have something to rest the weight on between shots, and the stool manages my own weight as I wait for the right moment. The sun eventually worked its way down to the bull, who is standing in a much more photogenic pose, side on to us, even facing us a bit, so I spent some time catching the first light as it caught him. Then lots more shots of the cow swimming and eating, alternating with shots of the bull, who was much more active this morning, as it turned toward us and ambled down toward the back of the reeds. It was only when the cow climbed out that we saw the calf, which must have been feeding on the back side of the reeds. Cow and calf headed across the slope behind the pond, and again the bull shadowed them, before, with a sudden burst of speed, he made his feelings toward the calf perfectly clear. No damage done, and all three were over the ridge and gone again. It was several mornings later, after we moved our lodgings from Gardner at the north entrance of the park to Silvergate, just beyond the northeast entrance, before we saw more moose. Robert was taking care of business that day, and our other friends had left for home, so Diane and I were on our own. We had reliable information that moose were being seen near the Pebble Creek campground, at least one cow with twins, which we took to mean a cow and two calves. Pebble Creek was, of course, our first stop of the morning on our way from Silvergate to the Lamar Valley. We pulled into the parking area for the restroom just in time to see at least 3 moose running across the meadow and up the slope to the west and out of sight. Oh well. I used the facilities. At my age, I rarely miss a chance, and we drove slowly east, keeping our eyes on the willows back maybe 30 yards from the road. There was a car pulled off. I suspected they had just come from seeing the moose at the campground and were hoping to catch them as they came up over the ridge. But when we got out, there was a cow moose feeding at the edge of the willows right in front of us. A gentleman, who had indeed come from seeing the moose at the campground, said there had been a bull with her, but it had broken horns. We watched and photographed her for about 15 minutes before what was obviously a very young bull with an unbroken but very small rack, not much bigger than twice my hand span, came from a quarter-mile down the valley on the other side of the road, behind us, and then across the road. By then, we'd found a second cow feeding just down the line of willows from the first, an obviously pregnant cow who looked like she was carrying twins, a cow with twins. All this was taking place still in the shadows of the mountains across the way. Only the tops of the slopes on our side were in sun. I let the Sony a6700's auto white balance handle the light, though I did use machine learning auto white balance in Photomator to warm the images a bit when I processed them. The young bull paraded down the front of the willows, again not 30 yards from us, so close I had to zoom back to get him in frame, before a much larger bull, with an impressive rack, raised his head on the back side of the willow stand. That was all we saw of him for the moment, but the young bull turned into the willows, and we were treated to a good round of the sound of antlers crashing and brush moving. I moved up the road, hoping the big bull would emerge from the willows or that I could get a window into them to see what was going on. Eventually, the big bull did come out at the back edge of the willows and proceeded to angle out toward the road right towards us. He did not get closer than maybe 40 yards, but that was enough for some frame-filling shots of this magnificent animal. I'm told they grow bigger and get even more impressive racks down in the Tetons, but this one was good enough for me. For the next 30 minutes, we were treated to close views of both bulls as they took turns parading up and down the front of the willows and out into the meadow on the far side. Except for a short trip to Denver and Santa Fe to visit daughters and grandchildren, this was the Sony a6700 and Tamron 50-400's first real workout. Overall, I was very happy with the results. The Sony produces beautiful images with great color and dynamic range, and a nice dimensionality. The lens adds to the 3D pop and is sharp enough to handle enough cropping to give me frame-filling images of almost anything I encounter. There are a few things that annoy me. The most troublesome is that the ISO control on the outer edge of the 5-way control wheel on the back of the camera is way too easy to press with the heel of my hand as I lift the camera to eye level. On one occasion, I released it with the ISO accidentally set to 32,000 and proceeded to take a series of photos at that setting while hiking on the upper terrace of Mammoth Hot Springs. No great loss, as the images were correctly, if not optimally, exposed, but I did go back another day and retake them. I finally figured out, after returning home, how to disable the button in Customize Operations, and I have it turned off now. The only other issue I had a number of times is that the front control wheel is also easy to unintentionally turn a click or two while handling the camera, throwing the exposure compensation off. That I will have to keep an eye on, as I do use exposure compensation from time to time. Still, the Sony a6700 and the Tamron 50-400 f4.5 to 6.3 Di3 VC VXD zoom are fast, accurate, and with thy bird and wildlife modifications to program mode, reliable in almost any situation. For more on bird and wildlife modifications to program mode, see the link in the description below. And keep your eye on this space for more bird and wildlife adventures with the Sony a6700 and the Tamron 50-400 in Maine, Costa Rica, Ohio, Yellowstone, and who knows where else.